Paris's Notre Dame is historically the most visited monument in the world. Unfortunately, the 2019 fire put a temporary stop to that, and I actually watched a lot of that fire from this very spot. But just because you can't go into Notre Dame right now doesn't mean you can't get a little bit of a taste of the city's history through a variety of other churches. And I might have a sneaky way of getting you into Notre Dame in another way before they even open it back up. So you'll want to watch for that. In today's video, we're going to go to 3 of my favorite off the beaten path churches around Paris and show you a little bit of the city's history. And it wouldn't be a Paris in my pocket video if I didn't also pair each of those churches with something delicious along the way. I've lived here for 7 years and I can assure you that you should never go to church on an empty stomach. This is Paris in my pocket's guide to getting your Notre Dame fix in 2024. Let's go. Construction on Notre Dame began over 860 years ago and took over 200 years to complete. It's undergone a number of upgrades and renovations over the centuries, but probably the most notable is Viollet-le-Duc's 19th century edition of the spire. That spire was home to a few icons, including the rooster on the very top, a symbol of France, and 12 copper statues representing the 12 apostles. One of those statues, St. Thomas, the patron saint of architects and builders, was recognizable from the ground because he happened to be the only one that was turned around facing the spire, admiring his own handiwork? Yeah, because he was made to resemble Viollet-le-Duc himself. And thankfully, he got a good 150 years of admiration in or so before the fire. Thankfully for the rest of us, all those copper statues were actually off the spire at the time for cleaning because of the renovation project, and so they were saved. They didn't end up going up in flames, and we actually have those originals still today. Those original copper statues and the rooster, which looks like the gangliest rooster you've ever seen, are on display today at the Architectural Museum in Trocadero if you should like to go visit them. The 2 big updates in recent months are as follows. Theoretically, they're going to be getting all the scaffolding off of the church in time for the Olympics, which, whether or not that's true, I'll be very excited to see the whole church again for the first time in a really long time. The second is that they've bumped up the reopening date to December of 2024, in keeping with Macron's original promise to get the church reopened by 2024. Whether these things come to pass or not, I'll be very excited to have the church back. It is genuinely my favorite church in the city, the only cathedral in Paris. For the Americans watching, there is only one in every city, and we're gonna get it back soon. But if you're coming in 2024, you can still get your fix. And we're gonna go to 3 off the beaten path churches right now, and I'll show you some tasty snacks you can have along the way as well using my guide from parisinmypocket.com. Go to parisinmypocket.com right now, get access to my guide, all the best places to eat and drink in the city, along with all the places we're gonna go to today. Let's get out of here. We head now to the opposite end of history under Napoleon III and France's Second Empire to Saint-Augustin. This church is interesting for a number of reasons. Principally among them, the fact that it was built to fit this tiny little weird parcel of land behind me between all of these Haussmannian boulevards. Haussmann, under the Second Empire, was busy plowing massive boulevards all across the city, and he wanted visual anchors at the head of each. Monuments, big churches like this guy, included. This one was heavily influenced by Napoleon III's exile in London, where St. Paul's Cathedral had a very similar dome that you might see on top. That dome, being as big as it is, and the plot of land being as oddly shaped as it is, makes the church feel a little bit squished underneath. Doesn't help that the front is narrower than the back, which is also an odd feature of this church, but it makes it very visually distinct. The other thing that makes it visually distinct and historically accurate is that it is the first church in Paris to have incorporated visual ironwork in its design. Not only can you see the iron skeleton, but it's designed to look beautiful as it supports the stonework. The other thing that's interesting about this church is it was one of the earliest to have an electric organ as well as electric lights. And it's those electric lights combined with the wood flooring, the stonework, and the iron skeleton that really makes it feel like a steampunk Game of Thrones when you walk through this place. I really love it. The space, it's deceptively large on the inside. It's kind of like a TARDIS in that it looks smaller on the outside than it feels on the inside. The whole thing just feels regal and a little bit villainous at the same time. I love this church. Even Parisians miss this church being here a lot of the time. Go check it out. And if you do end up in this neighborhood and you check my guide, you'll see that there's a Noir right there, just around the corner. There's me, there's the Noir. Let's go get coffee. Noir is a little bit of a lifesaver in Paris at this point because they are popping up all over the place and in a lot of parts of town that didn't used to have good coffee. But if you're into specialty coffee and you're looking for something that tastes delicious, whether that's the flattest of flat whites or the coldest of cold brews, Noir will have you covered. And their pastries are good. My favorite is gonna be the chocolat fleur de sel chocolate chip cookie. Go for that one. But of course, the lemon cake is also very delicious. Anywho, before we get on to our next giant church, let's do some honorable mentions really quickly for those of you that are rooting for churches that aren't gonna be in here otherwise. Of course, I'm gonna get yelled at if I don't throw a few honorable mentions in here, like Sacré-Cœur, which is gonna give you that really nice feel. It's an amazing church, fairly new church, but has just the space inside of it. If you want age, we should go all the way back to Saint-Germain-des-Prés. That church is very old and will give you a nice medieval feeling on the inside, especially the really blue ceilings, gorgeous. And if you're missing stained glass, you could do no better than Saint-Chapelle, which is gonna absolutely light up your world until the rose windows in Notre Dame come back. Those are 3 honorable mentions, not so off the beaten path, but definitely ones that'll make a big difference if you've got a bit of an itch for some old churches. Saint-Eustache is a really interesting church for a number of reasons, but the first is probably in its history. It was originally built when Les Halles, the area that we're in right now, was the central wholesale food market for all of Paris. Famously disgusting, covered in rats. There's a whole bunch of stories about how hilariously gross this area used to be. And it still kind of lives up to a little bit of that reputation. That role is now filled by Rugny, a market out in the suburbs that is the second largest wholesale food market in the world. Les Halles, for its part, is honestly not a neighborhood that my friends and I ever go to. Most Parisians would probably avoid it, but it's really close to a lot of things in town, and there are a bunch of streets around here that happen to have a lot of really good food. So I would not avoid some of the neighborhoods neighboring it. Butchers were the big money makers back then, and they had their hand in the construction of a number of monuments in the neighborhood, but this is probably the biggest. In fact, it is the second largest church in all of Paris, smaller only than Notre Dame. There's a lot of history that has crossed paths with Eustache, like Louis XIV taking his first communion here, or Mozart holding his mother's funeral here. That one kind of blew my mind. This is where we're going to be going to get our flying buttresses fill for the day. Saint-Eustache is a mix of flamboyant Gothic on the outside and classical or Renaissance on the inside, but you can see the architectural intermingling on the outside by looking at the front of the church, where there's an unfinished tower in the classical entrance on the facade, and then the rest of it being the more flamboyant Gothic. The only entrance that I was ever familiar with in the past was the one that was in the southeast corner. Entering by that one is wildly disorienting because you walk through the choirs and nothing is quite the way you think it's gonna be. That always used to blow my mind. However, now you can go in through the classical entrance at the front, or often at the side, especially if there happens to be a light show on, which, if you're in luck, there might be, and we'll be sure to leave a link to that below. Anyway, 2 churches down, and I'm starting to feel a little bit hungry. Oh, I wore my hat specifically as a way of reminding you as well that, fellas, you can't wear hats inside the churches, so when you walk in, make sure to take it off, put it under your arm or in your bag or whatever else, and then you can put it back on when you come out. The goal is to show some respect and make sure not to disturb people while they're in the church, so try to minimize the flash photography. I probably would say no flash photography whatsoever, but filming and photographs are totally fine. Just be respectful, cool, calm, and quiet. And you know what else is respectful, cool, calm, and probably a little noisy? It's gonna be lunch. And as you can see from my guide here, when we hit the little button there, boo, 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 if we zoom in on ourselves, we find a delicious option for lunch right here in the form of Melt Deli. I'm so hungry, I could use a little bit of I'll tell you all about it. I'm gonna go get a sandwich. Melt is one of those places that I stumbled across years ago when they only had one location, and then they started opening multiple locations, and then they opened their deli. Their deli focuses on sandwiches. I've had the pulled pork, I've had the brisket, I've had the Wagyu beef, but I have not had the spicy chicken sandwich yet, and just look at this thing. We'll give you some French options here soon, don't worry. I'll let you know at the end of this video where that's coming, but honestly, I'm so excited for this. I also ordered it extra spicy, and it is a little spicy. With Notre Dame out of commission, my favorite church in all of Paris has to be Saint-Etienne-du-Mont. Saint-Etienne-du-Mont is the tiny church that's hidden behind the Pantheon, the giant church that's standing right behind me. That was a church and is no longer a church, then became a church, then wasn't a church anymore. It went through a few cycles of that, and now is the home of France's finest. Dead. This is where you get to be buried if you happen to make it to the very, very tippy top of French culture and like nationalism. So anyways, between the Pantheon and Saint-Etienne-du-Mont, you actually find yourself with some very confusing and very interesting history. Long story short, in the 5th century, Saint Genevieve, the patron saint of Paris, was born and was such a strong interceder that she actually managed to pray Attila the Hun away, diverting his attack from Paris to Orléans, making her one of the venerated saints of Paris and one of the greatest villains of Orléans, at least in the 5th century. They're over it now. I think they've let it go. Genevieve has been the patron saint of Paris ever since and has quite the interesting history. She managed to do a lot both alive and dead, but we'll leave that for later. This church was built for her originally, but then of course ended up becoming a national shrine. Her remains currently are in a reliquary in Saint-Etienne-du-Mont. It gets kind of juicy because her relics were paraded around town whenever the city was in need, and then eventually the revolution put her bones on trial, found her a collaborator with the throne, burned them, and dumped the ashes in the river. So there's not a whole lot left in there, but they did collect a few other parts from around the world and put them in the reliquary in the church. The church itself is one of my favorites because of the architecture. The stonework is beautiful. It's very smooth, warm, round, organic. There's something almost like a forest when you go in. It feels soft and welcoming, but close, without being claustrophobic. The stained glass is incredible, and honestly, it just gives me a fantastic vibe every time. But one of the often overlooked elements of this church is not only the mixture of classical and Gothic architecture, especially in the facade, but the asymmetry of the facade with the tower to the left. There's something about it that's always stood out to me and something that I've always loved. I think this church is a fantastic find, and it is one that is often overlooked because people see the Pantheon, they go around it, and they continue on, and they never stop to check out this little church on the side that was here long before, and I think is absolutely worth a visit. All right, we should get out of traffic. All this church talk has really got me thirsty, and there's a place right across the street from the church where we can grab a pint. Fantastic view. I mean, it's not going to be very French at all, but I have that for you coming here too. Right across the street from Saint-Etienne-du-Mont is the Bombardier. I always call it the Bombardier because that's how they spell it, and I've lived in France for too long. But if you'd like to pop in for a nice pub environment, chill, cozy, sometimes loud and sporty, depending on the day when you come in, you can pop a seat right out here in the front or hang out inside with a view through the windows to the church, the Pantheon, and the student life wandering around just outside. Oh, and before we go, I almost forgot to tell you about the way you can get into Notre Dame for a special experience. There's a VR experience called Notre Dame Éternelle that's in 2 locations, one below the church itself and the other out in La Défense. And you can get a nice, actual walk through the church and its history in VR. I did it last year with my buddy Paul in La Défense. I loved it. I think it's a super cool experience, and at 20 euros per person, super worth it. If you've got the time, highly recommended. Anyway, but boy, has going into all these churches made me thirsty, and if you're into wine and you're curious about wine bars in Paris, then you'll want to watch this video next. Right here, it's my updated wine guide for 2024. We're gonna go give you 5 essential tips to enjoying wine in Paris and having the best experience possible, along with 5, maybe more places you can get some really delicious wine while you're here in Paris. This has been Paris in My Pocket's guide to getting your Notre Dame fix in 2024. Hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe, and then go watch this video.